Okay, welcome to this explainer. Let's just dive right in and step inside the final hours of the most famous ship ever built. Picture this. The ocean is perfectly calm, the night is silent, and over 2,000 passengers are laughing and dreaming aboard the largest, most spectacular ship ever constructed. They absolutely believed they were sailing on a floating palace that simply could not sink. But as we know, within just a few terrifying hours, the icy Atlantic Ocean turned those dreams into one of the deadliest disasters in human history. Today, we're going to uncover what truly doomed the RMS Titanic. For literally decades, the story's been pretty straightforward, right? A giant ship hit a giant iceberg. But was it really just a freak act of nature, or was it actually a hidden cascade of human errors, ignored warnings, and just sheer arrogance? We're not just retelling an old story right now. We're going to break down the exact chain of deadly mistakes that sealed the ship's fate. All right, Section 1, the unsinkable floating palace, a ship of dreams. Back in the early 1900s, the White Star Line was completely determined to build the greatest passenger ship in history. At over 882 feet long, the Titanic looked absolutely unstoppable. I mean, newspapers were literally calling it unsinkable. But aboard this moving masterpiece, there was a really stark contrast. Up top, you had the first-class passengers. We're talking wealthy businessmen, celebrities, politicians, basically living in a moving royal palace with grand staircases and massive feasts. But down below, the third-class passengers, hundreds of them crowded together, treating this ship as a floating bridge to a brand new life in America. You have extreme luxury stacked directly above desperate hopes. But as we'll see, the ocean doesn't care about the difference. Moving on to Section 2, a chain of fatal errors, ignored warnings, and locked doors. So, as the ship sails deeper into the North Atlantic, the radio operators are just getting hammered with warnings from nearby ships about massive ice fields. But Captain Edward Smith? He's highly experienced, sure, but he is pushing for speed. The company desperately wanted headlines about the ship's incredible power, so they're racing through this dark ocean at nearly top speed, completely ignoring the danger. And I want you to think about the number 0, because that is the exact number of binoculars available to the 2 lookouts stationed high up in the crow's nest that night. 0. On a ship of this magnitude, how does that even happen? Well, crazy enough, the binoculars were accidentally locked away before the journey even began. And to make matters worse, the night of April 14th was unusually calm and completely moonless, which makes it practically impossible to spot waves breaking around the base of an iceberg. So without those binoculars, these lookouts were basically left blind, scanning a freezing, pitch-black, empty ocean with just their tired eyes. Which brings us to Section 3, the Midnight Tragedy. The impossible happens. It's 11:40 p.m. Lookout Frederick Fleet suddenly sees something massive looming in the dark. He rings the warning bell 3 times, screams, "Iceberg right ahead!" The officers frantically try to reverse and turn, but it's just too late. Now, what's really wild is that the actual collision was so subtle, a lot of the passengers barely even felt it. Some were literally joking around, kicking fallen chunks of ice across the deck like little toys. But down below the surface, a total nightmare was unfolding. It all came down to a devastating math problem, 4 versus 6. The ship's engineers quickly realized the Titanic was designed to stay afloat if up to 4 compartments flooded. But the iceberg had already ripped open 6. The unsinkable ship was mathematically, undeniably doomed right then and there, and Captain Smith knew they had less than 3 hours before the whole thing disappeared. And this leads us to perhaps the most infuriating realization in this entire explainer: the sheer design arrogance. They literally prioritized the ship's beautiful appearance over safety. The designers genuinely believed the Titanic itself was safer than any lifeboat, so they didn't want to clutter the deck with them. The deadly reality of that decision: they only carried enough lifeboats for about half of the people on board. Hundreds of lives were basically forfeited just because of a visual aesthetic choice. Let's trace that horrifying final timeline. 11:40 p.m., the iceberg is struck. Over the next couple of hours, absolute panic starts to spread. Passengers realize the lifeboats are being lowered half empty, while third-class passengers find physical barriers blocking their escape to the top deck. By 2 a.m., the massive bow plunges deep beneath the freezing ocean, lifting the back of the ship terrifyingly high into the air. Furniture is crashing, lights are flickering out, and then a horrifying roar as the ship just snaps right in two. By 2:20 a.m., the Titanic completely vanishes into the dark Atlantic. Throughout all this chaos, you have the ship's radio operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, desperately tapping out SOS messages. Come quickly, Titanic sinking. I mean, just let the pure desperation of those 4 words sink in for a second. They sent these signals out into the dark, but the absolute closest ship, the Californian, totally failed to respond properly. Another ship, the Carpathia, did hear the call, but they were miles and miles away. You know, disasters always reveal true human nature. And that night, we saw total cowards, grown men literally disguising themselves as women just to steal spots in the limited lifeboats. But we also saw unbelievable heroes. The musicians, they played cheerful music on the deck to the very end just to keep people calm. Engineers stayed way below deck, sacrificing their own lives to keep the electricity running so the SOS signals could keep firing. And then there's the incredibly tragic devotion of Isidore and Ida Strauss. Ida actually stepped right out of a lifeboat, choosing to die holding her husband rather than leave him behind. Okay, Section 4. Mysteries beneath the surface. What else went wrong? For decades, the ship just sat in absolute silence, 2.5 miles underwater. But in 1985, explorer Robert Ballard finally discovered the wreck. And that allowed scientists to uncover some truly shocking forensic evidence about why it sank so fast. First up, the steel used for the hull might have actually become super brittle in those freezing temperatures, making it crack way faster. Second, investigators figured out that lower quality rivets, the fasteners pinning the metal plates together, likely just snapped under the massive pressure. And third, there are reports suggesting a hidden coal fire had actually been burning in the storage area for days, severely weakening the metal hull before the iceberg even touched it. And adding to the sheer chilling nature of this disaster is this seriously eerie legend. Months before the Titanic even set sail, a novel called Futility was published. It described a gigantic, quote-unquote, unsinkable ship named Titan, which hits an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sinks because it doesn't have enough lifeboats. I mean, the similarities are so terrifyingly spot on that a lot of people genuinely believe the disaster had been supernaturally predicted, a real-life Titanic curse. Finally, Section 5. The price of arrogance. Lessons from the depths. Hours later, when the sun came up, the rescue ship Carpathia finally arrived. As the rest of the world woke up to the news, they were just stunned. Out of over 2,000 passengers and crew, more than 1,500 people had died. It wasn't just the failure of a massive machine. It was a catastrophic failure of human overconfidence and pride. But if there is a silver lining, this single event permanently changed maritime safety forever. The laws were completely rewritten. Ships were now legally required to carry enough lifeboats for absolutely everyone on board. Radio operators had to be listening 24/7, and international ice patrol systems were set up to constantly monitor those dangerous waters. It took a tragedy of this massive scale to force humanity to finally respect the raw power of the ocean. Which brings me to a question I want you to really chew on. Does technology make us invincible? Over 100 years later, do we still carry that exact same arrogance today? We keep building faster, taller, and smarter, constantly thinking disaster only happens to other people in the past. But somewhere down in the freezing darkness beneath the Atlantic, the Titanic is still sitting there as a silent, haunting warning. Nature really doesn't care how advanced we become. So what do you think? Have we actually learned the lesson of the unsinkable ship?